I'm Mike LeClare. I head up the data compilation quality team here at Agile Education Marketing.
And I'm Verlan Stevens. I'm the CIO and managing partner, one of the co-founders here at Agile. Thank everyone for joining us today. Mike and I are just going to have a bit of an informal conversation around the data, what kind of changes and trends we're seeing, where things are moving that we think. And so, we just wanted to have a little bit of a, talk data to me. Let's start off first, Mike, and talk about the question about knowing your districts. I hear it come up. I've heard it now multiple times from superintendents. Don't get on the phone with me or don't set up a meeting with me and come in and say, tell me about your district. They're like, ugh, I want to throw those people out of my office. All it means to me is you didn't do your homework. No. What does doing your homework look like?
I've loved soccer for years. It's the old know before you go. Have a plan. You have to understand what they're up against. Have they experienced learning loss? Have they experienced learning gains? What's their funding like? What's their turn in personnel? What's going on with the district? If you can't relate to me early on, you're going to lose that first impression capability to really make a difference for me.
I think the other thing, there's two other pieces I think really come into that. One is the district strategic plans. Most significant districts have a strategic plan in place, and they really want to look for alignment. Yeah. So what you're in here talking about, does that align with the strategic plan? If it does and you can link those two together, that's a huge advantage. Yep. The other thing we heard very much was around efficacy. So with the influx of ESSER money, there was a lot of money, I'll call it the spaghetti model. Throw it against the wall, see what sticks. Well, they're trying to figure out now what sticks. Yeah. So what has worked, what hasn't worked, how do we pare this back down to the essential and really focus on what's working and throw out the stuff that isn't?
Well, it's the evolution of the district plan like we're seeing. It used to have a lot of different strategic initiatives, and like you said, they're really figuring out, no, these are the ones that impact the students in the most efficient way. And understanding that before you reach out to them, really important.
Yeah, and so, knowing the district that you're talking to, either in your marketing messaging or in your sales interactions, is just super critical. Yeah. You've got to know who you're talking to. That this universe is not just about the contacts, it's about the context. Yeah. Who is this? Who am I talking to? What's their size? What are their challenges? What other products do they have? That all goes into this. It's a relatively small universe that talks a lot.
You have to make your message relatable.
Yes.
If it's not relatable to them, if it doesn't help them out, you didn't do your homework.
Yeah. Visualizing the landscape, and so trying to see what this looks like. I think it's important for organizations to, one, understand where their selling strengths and weaknesses are. We can always go through, and if we're analyzing sales, look at, oh, you do great in big districts. Your direct sales team is in there shaking hands and you're making the message. And the medium-sized school districts, a lot of places struggle with because they may not have an in-person salesperson coming in, but they're too big and have too large a decision-making team to respond to direct mail or ads or other things. And so, one of the things to really understand is to analyze what that striation looks like. I think, it's always been one of the things I find most interesting about this industry is the wide variety. You're dealing with districts that have as few as 10 students and districts that have 1 million students. Very seldom do you sell in an industry that has that range in size. Yeah. And education is exactly that.
Well, in needs and what they need, how does your product or your message, again, relate to the person that you're reaching out to? And are you reaching out to the right person? The person at a district of 10 is going to be very different than the superintendent that's getting 400 emails a day at a large district.
Yeah, and do you have a strategy for each of those layers? And I think that becomes the thing that's really challenging for companies, and even big companies. I worked a number of years ago on a sales analysis for Pearson in their digital products, And one of the things was they had a real gap in one of the middle tiers.
Yep.
The small districts, they did really well. The bigger districts, they did really well. One of those middle tiers, they struggled. And I talked to the head of sales, and he's like, yeah, we know we struggle there. They're too small for us to send a person out there to talk to, and they're too big to respond to our standard marketing efforts.
Yep.
We don't have a solution for that group.
Yeah.
And it's important as a seller to understand, do you have ways to reach out and engage these districts at different sizes? Or do you just say, hey, our product applies to this tier and we're not going to go to the biggest?
Yeah.
We're not doing the mega districts. We can't convince a New York City to go with this, and we don't want to wait the length of time. And we're not going to go after the, rural, teeny tiny school district because there's just not enough money to justify the cost.
Well, and just focusing just on the size isn't always right either. Those mid-levels that have a great range of students, again, knowing those district initiatives, the plan that they want, yeah, it's good to know the size, but there's so many other aspects to the mosaic that's going on. It's not just good enough to say these are the size districts. It's, well, these also are struggling in math, or these are struggling in ELA, or these are having significant funding cuts because of population,
Shifts.
movement.
Yeah.
And it's, there's that starting part, and then again, you got to know the audience.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all
No.
by any means, or one size fits 3 or 4.
Yeah.
It is very tailored towards the size and needs of the individual districts.
Yeah.
One of the other things we're starting to see a lot more of is interest in kind of trending information. We had one of our key clients come to us a few weeks ago. They were having a board meeting. They were trying to look out where should their products be focused in 5 years from now. And they had an interesting question around shifting enrollments. And were we seeing a shift in enrollments between public schools and private schools? And we hadn't looked at the trend over the last 5 years, and we did, and there has been some, and there was certainly a peak up during the pandemic when lots of public schools were closed and people were trying to figure out how they could work and whatever else, and ended up with a boost there. It normalized a little bit, but over the last 5, we've certainly seen an increase in enrollment in private schools and a general decline in publics. They don't 100% match up. That for every 100,000 drop in public, we saw about 50,000 increase in private,
Yeah.
and the others kind of evaporated.
Yeah.
And we know there's a significant homeschool market.
The micro schools.
The micro schools, there's still a continuing thing there. They're super hard to track and identify and know what's there. And we've also just seen general, depends on your area of the country or whatever, declines in population.
Well, again, migration out of certain states into other states, for numerous different reasons. But
Yeah.
there are states that Georgia's had a big increase in number of schools
have.
and students, and everybody kind of thinks, well, maybe Florida, maybe Texas, but Georgia's had a really big increase. And looking at those enrollment trends is kind of fun because it's not where we're at, it's where we're going, and it helps you plan.
And it's interesting you picked Georgia because I recently heard an assistant super talking about a district in Georgia outside the Atlanta area, and they had literally 2 years ago opened a new high school with an AI focus. And I'm thinking, wow. 2 years ago, we were barely talking about AI. They had to be planning that years ahead of that in terms of building construction and things.
Absolutely.
And so there's really some interesting things going on in Georgia around where's that next, need in the workforce and some of that kind of stuff. And I was blown away. I literally could not believe that in the last 2 years, they opened a high school and their primary track is AI.
Well, that's great because not only is it what's going to be the focus in the workplace, it's also what generates the interest from the students.
Well,
And if you're able to connect the two, then that's so much better for everyone involved.
No, and you're so right. The other big trend, of course, we've seen is lack of engagement of particularly secondary students. That the attendance is down, the participation in things is down. We went through this period of the pandemic, and as we've come out, we still have not rebounded in terms of engagement of the students on a continuing basis in the high schools.
Well,
and that's a
discipline
huge
as
jump.
well, and anecdotally, talking to principals and other people, one of the terms I liked is the kids kind of came back feral, and they had to kind of rein them back in to kind of no, this is how we interact. This is face to face is a little different, and to your point, it's impacted attendance. And part of that is yes, it's a teacher-student interaction, but it's also student-to-student. Mm-hmm. That's evolved, and it's going to be interesting. When the civil rights data comes out, with some of the disciplinary aspects, has that had to go up as well? And I would expect it, but
I would too.
That'll be a fun data set to kind of dig into and see. Oh, okay, this happened, and this is what we're hearing, and then we get the numbers behind it. So
one of the things we haven't done there is correlate between the civil rights data with behavioral issues and things with student performance, and I suspect there's a very direct correlation.
And I even bet attendance as well.
I bet attendance as well.
Looking at bullying data points and attendance, and there was one that I really liked. There's a school in St. Louis where they installed washers, clothes washers and dryers. Attendance went up 8% or something like that, because the kids could come and clean their clothes at the school. I mean, that is so outside the box, it's ridiculous. But, I mean, it's a significant increase, 8, give or take. It's a while since I've read it. But it was a significant uptick by providing the opportunity to wash your clothes at school. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And thinking outside the box is kind of fun for that stuff. And
of course, we've got a number of states have gone to universal child nutrition and things like that, where they're feeding. I was just saw an article this morning about what they're already planning to do for over the summer, that they've got so many students that are on their food programs, and they anticipate that there'll be a severe hunger issue come summer that's just not going to be addressed.
Well, and it's great that states as a whole are really tackling this. Massachusetts, Colorado, they're making lunches free for everybody. But again, how do you carry that into the summer? How do you record that for Title I information? Like, understanding all that on that state by state's also really important. Again, just another piece of the mosaic.
Yeah.
So
the other thing we were going to talk about a little bit is reaching the right people. And, we've seen historically, we always saw, and it was funny, it was part of my kind of standard pitch. What's the turnover rate? It's 17%. What for principals? 17%. Superintendent, 17%. It always came back down to that number. Teachers, principals, supers, it's 17%.
it had.
It had. In general, we've certainly seen a significant uptick. I just ran the numbers over the last 5 school years, and superintendent turnover for last school year was almost 22%. Principal turnover, and that includes moving between buildings, a new assignment, was almost 24.5%. So, we're way up over that 17%, significant churn. The other thing that was really interesting is I looked at the change by week. So traditionally, superintendents served through the school year, so their contract ran through June 30. July 1 was renewal. They were either renewed or they weren't, and the new super was brought in.
Yep.
Yada, yada. Summer turnover, like clockwork.
Pretty methodical.
Pretty methodical. And that just isn't the case anymore. I went back and looked at the data, and of the last 18 months, we had only 3 weeks where we didn't record a superintendent change. And some of those were somewhat obvious. The week between Christmas and New Year's, where there was only 2 work days that week, we didn't record a super change. Okay, I get it.
Makes sense.
It may have happened, or nobody got fired that week. I don't know which, but basically, there were just very few weeks throughout that we didn't see a superintendent, and many times even what I would consider off cycle, 60 or 80 changes in a week.
Yeah.
That it just they're a constant change now. I was reading yesterday, the superintendent from Ann Arbor, Michigan. She's been there 10 years, which is unheard of. The average tenure is like 2 years and a month.
Like a CEO or a coach,
Yeah.
it's 2.5, 3 years.
Yeah, that's
pretty good.
She's been there 10.
Yeah.
And they obviously were not at contract renewal. Her contract ran through the end of the school year, and the board 5-2 voted to release the superintendent. And and it was interesting. In the article that I was reading about, it said it was really around, there were still hard feelings on some members of the board about how long students were out of school during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So we're back to some of that stuff that's a little bit, I don't want to quite call it ancient history, but it's certainly the past issues. And then another one was a federal court case that had been filed recently that they didn't feel like her team had been as responsive to that as it needed to be.
Yeah.
But it's just one example of
Off cycle.
And
Board vote.
Yeah. Every superintendent's one board vote away from not having a job.
Yeah.
And, we were talking about it a little earlier today. It creates this ripple disruption effect that suddenly, if they're willing to fire that person, then am I too closely aligned? Where does that leave me? Is this unstable now? We're changing of leadership, so I need to be out looking for a job. And we see that. We see this ripple effect through other staff at the district that is, comes after that. It isn't immediate, but it isn't that far out before suddenly you make people nervous.
The education universe isn't any different than, unfortunately, any other business aspect. It's, new leadership comes in depending on what they see. Sometimes they bring in people that are more closely aligned with their approach. And then you see that impact people that go, oh, I agree with this, or I don't agree with this. And sometimes it is their call to move on, and sometimes it's not their call to move on. But again, bringing somebody in within the district impacts a little differently than someone outside the difference. Knowing the culture, knowing the people, having relations, having the professional relationships with different people. How do you balance all that? And it's, again, knowing when to go back and make sure you're collecting the right people, making sure you're reaching out to the right people. It's a little awkward if you ask for Mitch, and Mitch left with Joe, and they're no longer here. Oh, okay. Making sure you get the right person is important, and understanding when you kind of see those people being brought in is important.
Yeah, we saw that article that came out recently from Fordham talking about principal turnover, and they specifically looked at multiple years of principal turnover in New York City. And it was really interesting, and again, not unexpected, but a lot of human nature wrapped in that. But one of the things was that you had principal turnover, student performance dropped.
Yep.
And it goes a little contrary, because there used to be this thinking that anytime you make a change, you
shake it up.
You turn up the lights in the factory and people work better. You turn down the lights, people work better. The change somehow made a positive impact. That's not true in this case for sure. The data does not support that they certainly saw that dip. The other thing, of course, that was interesting is you didn't see an immediate turnover in teachers, but you saw it a year later.
That I thought was, we had ideas, you hear it all the time. New leadership gets that chance, and sometimes you're aligned and sometimes you're not. And after that initial window is when a lot of that churn happened. Was not immediate. It was that second year where you saw that churn and that churn stabilization after that, however you want to look at it. But
and to your comment a second ago, that promotion from within. The other thing that was key in the finding is if they promoted an assistant principal to be a principal, we actually saw things better than if they brought in one from the outside. Yep. They understood the culture. They had a relationship with the people.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be challenging because if you already know that person, you don't like them from the get-go. But
it's some animosity if that person got the promotion and you didn't get the promotion. Like you said earlier, it's that human nature aspect that's sometimes hard to quantify, but panning out, it's easier to see that, and no surprises, but great to see hard evidence behind it for New York specifically that happens, and don't see why any other leadership roles within the education would be any different. Superintendents, district level, that sort of stuff. So,
but definitely, I think a lot of districts. That's the first time I've ever seen data that correlated principal turnover with student performance. Yep. And I think that's an interesting one where that change of leadership certainly did not have an immediate positive impact. In fact, it took them quite some time to kind of get things back on track again. There was a dip, and it took a while for it to kind of come back.
Yep.
But, reaching the right people, this off-cycle continuous change, one of the things that's become clear is that companies have to have a mechanism for dealing with that.
Yeah.
That, historically in this space, we would see people would take 2 update files a year. You get one after all the teachers are rostered and one after the district was, and we're good. And the problem is now that change is continuous. It's every week of the year. There is constant change going on, and that change really drives your sales and marketing efforts.
Yeah.
I saw one the other day where they were actually putting up an alert so that you had alerts that were new leadership in your area, and that really, it becomes key. So if you've got a new superintendent and they're in reevaluating all the things that are going on, if you're an existing vendor, you want to make sure you're out in front of that and that the new person understands your value that you brought to the district. And if you're not the incumbent, it's a wonderful opportunity to get your foot in the door because you've got somebody that's looking to make changes, and they are reevaluating virtually everything.
Yeah. Well, and back to your point about, making sure you're reaching out to the right people, that churn in leadership, that's going to impact things, and just timing overall, it used to be 17% for everybody, and that's evolved as well. But, we're getting hundreds of thousands of updates every single week, and that twice a year update model, I just don't understand it.
Yeah.
I mean, every single week, hundreds of thousands of re-verified roles, new roles, people that don't have the same role anymore, new emails, domain changes, and once a week sure seems to make a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, no doubt that being on top of that data, and then you can actually drive actions off of it.
Yeah.
They can, you've got a new superintendent, and they can be put in the new prospect stream of your marketing efforts, and they're there versus the last one would have been, hey, they've been a long time customer. So,
I've been working around 10 years in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
I know how that one works. Oh, somebody new. The same message isn't going to appeal and interact and drive that communication that you probably had with an established relationship. Messaging has to be different.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the real key aspects here is that really, and part of it that goes along with it, it's the sophistication of the marketing automation systems. Yeah. That ability to slice and dice up and have multiple streams running, and the new super stream and the existing customer and the prospect can all be running simultaneously, and that's kind of the norm in corporate marketing these days.
Well, that integration and making sure you're not processing a file twice a year and it's just rolling in, how does that not help?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
let's talk a little bit about some of our premium data sets. I know the one that you want to talk about all the time is school and student performance. And I think that one's always interesting to me. And we've talked about it a few times here, particularly around correlations with other, are we going to see correlations around bullying? Are we going to see correlations around staff turnover? What are the other things that are driving this? And I think it all in all is really interesting information, but I think sometimes it's even much more basic than that.
Well, we've been collecting performance data since AYP, and then we did the ESCA waivers, and then we've done it ever since they started tracking performance. We've followed it, and what's the most interesting about this new one is the dust has kind of settled a little bit for ESSA. They're not trying to do all their own things anymore. There's more they're doing, ACT Aspire, Smarter Balance, and stuff like that. So we're really getting a chance to start comparing year-over-year data points, which is really nice for work crafting the right message. The thing that I also like about the data is it's a state-by-state collection, where it may be tricky to exactly relate from New York to Montana to North Dakota. You can still paint a picture within that state because that's how it's being reported. The test in South Dakota is going to be different than the test in Massachusetts, but I can still tell you how many kids that state deems proficient in language arts, or ELA, or math, or grade level, stuff like that. And it's so many district plans align with increasing scores. I'm not saying tests are the best way to judge the effectiveness of I'm not going down that road because I don't agree with it, but it is impactful from the standpoint seeing those scores go up. It helps quite literally every aspect,
Yeah.
whether it's social economical, whether it's the schools standing within the state, the stress associated with it for the teachers. For me, I depends on the setup, on the quality. If you're freaked out that you're going to lose your job because the kids aren't testing right, like that's going to mess with you. There's that human element.
Yeah.
But again, going through all the states, having the years of experience, it helps paint a picture of a lot of the pain points or like points you're proud of. We saw schools pre-COVID that were really struggling in, ELA or math. And during COVID, their scores went up.
I remember you talking about that.
I reached out to a school. I was in Texas, and I said, what happened? Like 70, 80% of the schools in the U.S. are down, like more than 5%. Like, is a significant, and it makes perfect sense. What did you guys do? And she goes, oh, well, we had new leadership come in right before the pandemic, and they had a really good plan, and then they stuck with it, and you saw all the test scores go up when almost everybody else is going down. And harping back to that, get the right message, talking to her, they were extremely proud.
Of course.
And how would you not be of your scores going up?
Yeah.
If you reach out and you're like, hey, everyone's in trouble right now, we can help you out. I would almost take that offensively.
Of course you would.
Like, we worked so hard during all this. Our scores are up.
Yeah.
And just understanding what's going on in that universe for specific schools, year over year data, trending data. Again, we've been doing this since AYP. What's happening? And again, it's not the only way to look at a school's success, but it is a flashpoint, a hot topic, whatever you want to call it. It is important for a lot of people to see where they're at in student proficiency.
I think for any school leadership, it's always going to be front of mind.
Yeah.
That good or bad, that's how you're judged as to the effectiveness of your school and of your teachers.
Yep.
Is those test scores.
Yep.
And I think particularly being able to see what are the test scores for this school compared to the district,
Yep.
compared to the state.
Yep.
And so you really get an idea of, are they outperforming state performance? Are they on par with other schools in the district? Are they bottom 10% of schools in that district?
Yeah.
Those ones that are at the bottom, they got a very different problem than those guys that are blowing it out compared to everybody else in the district.
Well, again, talking to schools that were experiencing that, we've done case studies where we're looking at schools in Denver. And on paper, they look identical, created in the late 60s, similar student enrollments, teacher counts, all that. One was really struggling, and we were talking about the pain points for them. And talking to the principal, he's like, well, a lot of these kids don't know where their other meals are coming from. There's no way they have Wi-Fi. They're getting woken up with gunshots in the middle of the night. And then my coworkers, my teachers, they're talking about, repurposing the school, if certain criteria is not being met. The stress, there's so much that these people were dealing with and not being able to provide solutions. You're coming in, again, with the wrong message, that it just goes away.
Yeah.
And the flip side was another school that was doing very, very well. And we were asking what the pain points were there. And again, I mentioned, I like soccer, I've been coaching for years, and, most parents are great. But one of the pain points was the parents reaching out to the teachers so much about different scores that it was actually a detriment to the teacher's ability to help plan lessons and work together with stuff. And, again, understanding those pain points is important. And that ESSA data kind of helps paint that a little bit.
Yeah, it does.
So, yeah.
Some are focused on just making sure kids got a meal the next day, and others are trying to manage the expectations of hovering parents.
Yeah, exactly. And those two are different.
Yes, they are.
So, and then, with the new stuff, the normalization across the states from the feds, looking at the ATSI, CSI, kind of that overall, how's the school doing? Do they get additional funds? How's that work? That's kind of nice to kind of help normalize that bottom 5, 10%, depending on how you look at it, across the U.S., coming from the feds saying, yeah, we want this to recognize the lower schools.
Yeah. As you'd expect, there are pockets where there's higher turnover than others. There were some, you could obviously see where major interstates intersect,
Yep.
guess what? There was higher turnover. They're
Yep.
like big dots around
more
every-
districts, more like,
population.
It's just, population density comes into it.
Yeah.
And to your point though, that's also not always indicative of the change. You know, looking at the North U.S., you saw on the map, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of changes. But because the districts are bigger geographically, well, you're not going to see the same kind of explosion looking at the map where they still experience a very similar churn, you know, that
Yeah.
well, what, 22, 24% for leadership. And it just looks different because of the way it's spread out. In
The way
different
it's
areas.
structured too,
Yeah.
you know, I looked very specifically. It looked like when you look at the map, you're like, oh, there was hardly any turnover in Nevada or Florida. And you go back and you go, oh yeah, they have county-based districts. There's not that many counties.
Yep.
And guess what?
Yep.
They're still at about that 22%
Yep.
rate. It just geographically didn't look interesting
Well, and then-
versus the New York City area, and there's a bazillion little school districts
And this
in
and-
New York, New Jersey, that whole area there.
Well, even Texas, like with
Yeah.
their thousands of different school
1,500
districts.
Yeah, 1,500 school
Yeah,
districts
you
in
know.
Texas.
So,
And so, yeah, I didn't find anything kind of geographically that really stood out. And I'm sure if we dug in and we looked at, you know, was rural Kansas better or whatever?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some variation there, but there was super changes everywhere.
Yeah.
There were dots on the map in every state.
Yep.
There was multiples. It really, nobody is immune from this current kind of churn.
well, and again, looking at the states really helped kind of paint the picture because every state gets to kind of set up their own way, and knowing that Florida has a limited amount of districts, it still looks about, again, that 20 some odd percent. Yep, that's painting the picture still.
Where, you know, places, you know, New York State and some of the other New England, you know, every little town had a school district. And so, you know, they're just hundreds and hundreds of districts, you know, literally right next door to each other. And so, geographically, there wasn't any real standouts there.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that's been interesting is listening to the discussion around ESSER funds and things there. So, you know, about 80% of districts are reporting that they've either spent or have pre-allocated their ESSER funds. So that's starting to come to an end.
Well, and a lot of them were based on you have to spend it by this time, and use it or lose it. People
Yeah.
want to use it.
Yeah, nobody, very few people want to leave money laying on the table.
Yeah.
That when somebody hands you a stack of dollar bills, you're gonna try and spend it.
Yep.
And it was interesting. There was a lot of, you know, I'll call it, you know, spaghetti methodology where a lot of things were bought and tried and let's see what sticks. And now they're in the heavy evaluation stage. So there's a lot of districts are going back and really trying to understand, where did we really see the efficacy? You know, is this program outperforming that? We had 3 different math programs in here. Which one is showing the results? And is summer tutoring or summer school, which is driving better results? And so I think while we're going to see some contraction, because ESSER was a lot of money dumped into the education marketplace, you know, I think really what it came down to is, for things that are working, districts are going to find the money to continue for them.
Well, that's when you came back and you were talking about that. That was the part that was not only interesting but kind of reassuring too. That if something's working, it wasn't now we're going to lose it. It was, we're going to find a way that we can continue this.
Yeah.
You know, where we might not have been getting ESSER funds from the feds down to the Department of state level Department of Education and such, but if it's working, if it's stuck to the wall, we're going to make sure we keep on doing it, and we're going to find a way. And it wasn't like oh no, it was, no, we're going to make this work.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
You know, it's always interesting to me that when you're out talking to teachers and administrators and things, there's this degree of optimism that is always sometimes a little surprising. There was a question about, well, how many students do you think will be at proficiency? And 50% of the educators think, oh yeah, we're gonna have people at proficiency. You're like, no, you're not.
I've seen the numbers.
I've seen the numbers.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is. You're not moving the needle that quickly. But I think, you know, that was like you said, it was a really reassuring message that as long as you're really able to show what's working, And you got to have those analytics. You've
Yep.
got to be able to tie it to hard numbers.
Yep.
There can't, this soft, squishy.
It feels.
Yeah, it feels like it's better. That's going to be a problem. And I think, but, I heard whether they were seeking private partnerships at districts, local bond initiatives, whatever it was, the districts were working really hard to sort through and figure out what was working, what's not working, make those pairs, but things that were working, they're going to keep funding and they're going to keep putting money into it.
Was there confidence not only at the district county level, however you want to look at that, but also at the state level for the State Department of Education's providing that? Or is it really just we're going to take care of it?
I think some of both.
Yeah.
If we look here at Colorado, that the proposed, Colorado has run for years what they call the negative factor. So our state legislature made a determination that they were going to pull money out of school funding and apply it to other areas that were in need, like, oh, this bridge is falling down and we got to get repairs on infrastructure before we're worrying about K to 12. The current Colorado budget, this is the first time in, 20 years or something, 14 years, that we're going to have the money that was tagged through legislation for K-12 is going to go to K-12. And so we're not going to have this negative factor. And so I think that's, while it's an isolated, Colorado, what's happening there,
But
I
you
think
see
it's happening in other places too.
You see it in Florida too.
Yeah.
Taking it on themselves to say we're going to provide a certain level of I don't know how you want to phrase it, but we're going to handle a little bit more than just taking the federal money. We're going to also handle it at the state, county, level as well.
So
is what it seems like is happening. But again, it's hard to.
And we've been through a general period of good economic gains, and so while there's been inflation along with it, property tax valuations are way up. Colorado is one of the states that the property tax valuation is way up. How do you like that, Bill, when you got it?
That was nice.
Yeah. And so there are some offsetting things in the basic economy that I think is going to continue to provide. And again, everyone I talked to, they were very optimistic about what their budgets and things look like. And most districts were pretty smart about how they spent ESSER funds, knowing that it had an end.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of optimism around the feds coming back with more education funding.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm not always an optimist on that one.
There's a lot of moving parts for that.
There is a lot of moving parts for that. Or non-moving, as the case might be.
That's often the case.
So, I think that one's, we'll see. There still is a lot of optimism there, but I think there are a lot more at the state and local level and private-public partnerships and things where districts are getting it sorted out.
Yeah.
They're going to sort that out.
Yep.
But again, it's going to be focused on those products that are proven to be
well, and that's what's aligned with their district initiatives, strategic plans, all that sort of stuff.
So one of the data trends we haven't talked about yet is our Ed Intel data, and so we built our own custom data mining technology to go out and gather information from district websites, and we're always finding interesting things there. And we're expanding the categories. I think initially we had 9, we're up to 13.
Like learning management systems, security, stuff like that, and it just keeps on expanding.
It keeps on expanding. And, we picked up a lot around social emotional learning and, what districts are talking about it and who has anti-bullying policies and, those type of things. The latest one I'm looking at is AI. And it's really kind of interesting that, one of the things that there was a discussion around was, can we determine sentiment there? And so it's just fascinating that, one of the things AI does is when the large language models really allow you to determine based on the words that are being used, is this a pro-AI district or an anti-AI district? And, if you have a new product that has AI components to it, you may want to know that when you're going in and interacting with that district. Khan Academy is introducing a new product called Conmigo, which is an AI product, and it's very teacher focused. And individual classroom, it's free. It's kind of incredible because it will allow them to allow a teacher to feed in a lesson plan, and then it will level that out for the individual students and where they're at.
Yeah.
So the teacher doesn't have to produce a bunch.
If you got Johnny that's performing up here, it makes it more
gets
challenging
tougher
for him.
questions, yeah.
And for Johnny that may not be performing as well, and make sure that they're still finding success so they can go here too.
And the teacher doesn't have to teach just something, below the middle or wherever that, thing. It really allows them to really focus and cover that, and then it breaks it out for the individual students.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
But the lady that was handling the professional development there said, this is the hardest product I've ever trained teachers on because of the fear factor. They think that the AI is going to take their jobs away, it's going to replace them, and to convince them that this is a tool to make you a more effective educator, instead of this is going to take your job away. She says that takes a lot of discussion, takes a lot of work around that.
It's a conversation. It's not going to. It's hold on. Here's how it helps. It doesn't replace.
Yeah. So I think, but the thing I loved about that product from the beginning is we can update the entire universe about every 60 days. Yeah. So if we have somebody that comes in with something new that says, what do you guys know about what districts are talking about AI and how do they feel about it? We can literally roll that kind of stuff out, and 60 days later we have data.
Yeah.
And so
across the entire U.S.
Across the entire U.S.
It doesn't matter if California, New York, you can. It's smart enough and well worked in that we've had enough experience. I mean, until we've had that for how long now?
Probably 5 or 6 years at least. Yeah.
At least, and we've gotten decent at it, and the ability to, like you said, 60 days, cycle through nearly 20,000 districts, and keep the hand on the pulse, or whatever term you want to use. That's impactful.
Yeah. No, and I think that's really interesting for us to be able to follow trends and see trends as they're happening.
Yep.
Because previously the only thing we could do is say, oh, next year during our phone calling efforts, we can add a question about AI. How does your district feel about AI? And and it's super expensive. Every time we add a question is $1 an institution. So if we're calling districts and we've got 20,000 of them, it's at least $20,000 to add that one question.
Well, and it's just difficult anymore to call.
Well, there's that, but also you're so dependent on the person answering the phone. I don't know what in the hell they're doing about AI, or I know everything about it.
On some of those, there's some subjectivity in there. And
just a little.
Just a lot.
Just a lot. Yeah, so that's the other thing there that's always such a challenge. It's around that.
Yeah.
Other thing, things around I see a note here about first and second year teachers. Identifying where people are at in their profession, and are they looking for professional development? Are they looking for master's degree? Are they 5 years in and they've got to get to that next pay level, and so the master's degree becomes important. And so knowing and tracking that history of people becomes real important, and understanding, who, not only the districts and things, but then down to the person. Where is this person at in their career, and what does that look like, and how do you then maximize that to yield the best results you can?
Well, along those lines, even which generation does that person fall under? Messaging for someone in Generation X might be different than a millennial, might be different than a boomer, might be knowing how to appeal to that group is also impactful as well. And first, second year teachers, seeing how long they've been in education, making it just helps you again craft the right message to reach out to the right person.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of that information becomes valuable when you're really trying to do it. And and I think ultimately you're looking for engagement rates, whether it's on email and that drives whether you get inbox placement or not, or whether you're going out via one of the digital advertising channels where it's about ROI. And so you don't want to be putting ads in front of people that aren't part of the audience you want to be attracting. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure they're really educators, and you want to make sure you know where they're at in their career, or you want to make sure, we only want this ad to show up for principals and district personnel. We don't want every teacher to get one of these, where we're displaying to a much larger audience than what we really expect to. So having that kind of ability bring that down really makes it the difference between having a marketing program that just flops because the ROI isn't there, to one that is stellar because you're really getting that right audience and you've really honed that in.
Or scrolling through, you stop on the things that seem to relate a little bit more to you.
There you go.
It's in theory simple.
Well, in essence, it kind of is. If you're serving that to the right person, you'll get engagement.
Yeah.
But if it's the wrong audience, there's not the engagement that you're looking for out of it. And so, it is pretty simple. But we also, it's finding the person where they are. Different people are on different social platforms. I'm kind of a Facebook person. I fit their demographic.
I was going to say we're a little older. We're going to be a little more Facebook.
But other people are not. And so, and I think that's one of the things we've gotten very good about as well, is looking at our historical data and saying this group of people responds better here, either based on age group or based on their prior responses.
Yep.
And so we're really able to direct things toward the channels that are working better and try and focus those efforts. And again, drive ROI, where we're getting 3 and 4 times the ROI that just a general industry blast would be getting.
Yeah.
Well, that's the difference between making money and losing money. So, really important in terms of how you utilize that data to drive the sales and marketing that you're looking for.
Absolutely.
And that was the piece on our last one, is send the right message with precision marketing. It's exactly what we were just talking about. So, it's really being able to precisely target the group that you're going after. And not only it's the right message, the right person, the right time, and where they're at. That's become the other thing that's become different over what it was a number of years ago, when you could just blast out emails to that group.
Yeah.
There's so much blocking of email content these days that I think you really are, a lot more of your effort has to be in the multi-channel area. And that's just a lot more complex, where you've got 6 or 8 channels and trying to determine, well, this teacher's on Pinterest, and this teacher spends their time on Facebook, and this teacher is on Instagram, and we want to make sure we're putting the ads where the right people are going to see them.
Yeah. Yeah. Taking all this data that's out there and turning it into a story, making sure it's, it touches base with them, it hits home, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
There's enough data out there that you can craft it, you can make it right. So.
But it's always been a dynamic environment, but I think the rate of change has accelerated considerably. We're seeing changes much faster, more throughout on a continuous basis. So, we're going in, we're changing our methodologies to adapt to that. And, it's just, the world is changing in a number of ways, and things are accelerating. It's always accelerates, it seems like.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the key, is that companies have got to be more agile about what they're doing. They've got to be following the trends closer. They've got to be making adjustments. That's one of the things we do with our digital campaigns, is we're monitoring performance every day. And when one starts to go off or the cost starts to go up, we have to redirect and make changes. And so you didn't do that when you were sending out a mass email. You blasted it and then waited around to see what the results were. Here on these continuous programs, we're constantly kind of tweaking it to get the best performance we can out of it. So a lot of change on the data side, and I don't see that slowing down. Nope. I don't see any trend there that indicates that we're going to go, that we peaked and we're going to go back down to 17% turnover rates. I don't see that.
Nope.
So.
Nope.
Anything else?
No, covered quite a bit. I think we're in a good spot, getting ready to lead into our next discussion, reaching out with the right message to the right person. Thanks do we thank him for joining us?
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening in. I hope some of the things that we've talked about today trigger interest or things. You can always reach out to the team here at Agile for more information, and we're happy to engage and see if there's anything we can do to help and see what kind of things we can see in the data. That's what we do best, and certainly anxious to pass on whatever tidbits we're finding.
Thanks for your time today.